I will now call to order the study session meeting of May 17th, 2021. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting is being held electronically, and I should have this memorized by now. And members of the council are participating remotely pursuant to the council's electronic participation policy. Public access to the meeting is available on the local government access channel 8 for Comcast and Xfinity subscribers, on the city's YouTube channel online, and by telephone using the call-in numbers posted on the meeting agenda. Joanna, will you call the roll, please?
Mayor Leidy?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilford?
Here.
Councilmember Witkovich?
Here.
Councilmember Peterson?
Here.
Councilmember Downing?
Here.
Councilmember Brown will be absent. Councilmember Goff?
Here.
Councilmember Duran-Malika?
Here.
And Councilmember Escobar will be late. Thank you.
Great. So we have 3 items on our study session agenda. The first one is an Xcel update. City Manager Geyer will introduce this item, but I want to welcome Craig. Craig, can you pronounce your last name for me?
Good evening, Mayor. Craig Eicher.
Eicher, thank you.
Yeah.
You are our new Xcel guy. Welcome.
I am.
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you as well.
City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. I'm happy to have Craig here this evening. There's 2 pieces. First and foremost, his introduction to all of you. Craig, I don't remember when you took over for Preston. It feels like you've been with us for like 5 years, but that's so true with so many COVID-related things. So welcome. He does have an ask for council tonight, which is a letter of support for a PUC ruling. So a PUC case rather. So we'll dive into that. I did email an item to council that Councilmember Goff just about an hour ago. Councilmember Goff said to go ahead and forward from CC4CA regarding Xcel's request for support in its proposed clean energy plan. So that's in your inboxes. Apologies we didn't get that to you sooner. But welcome, Craig, and I'll turn it over to you.
Why, thank you, Heather. Thanks so much. Everybody can hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mayor Leidy. I appreciate your and Heather's invitation to join your work session tonight. And thank you to the rest of council for the small amount of time I'd like to ask of you tonight to hear what Xcel Energy is doing right now for the state of Colorado and for all of our customers on the environmental side. First of all, as you know, I took Preston Gibson's place. I know he's very well loved and beloved in all of the communities, particularly in Northglenn, and I will try very hard to deliver to you the same level of quality and friendly service that he always had for you folks. So I'm your chief point of contact for anybody on City Council, the City Manager's office. That's my job, and I'm very happy to do it. Happy to have the chance to speak with you tonight on Colorado's energy future. Xcel Energy in 2018, just as a matter of very brief history, was the first major utility in the nation to announce that we were planning to get to 100% carbon-free energy by 2050. And at the time, we were the only one in the nation doing so. Since then, many have jumped on board with the same sort of goal. But now we've updated that goal to a very specific plan. And it's that plan that we have filed just this past February with the Public Utilities Commission in Denver. And it's that plan that we would like to respectfully ask for your city's endorsement in the form of a letter to the Public Utilities Commission. And all of the information that sort of backs what I'm going to be talking about tonight is in the packet. But here is the first slide, and it really is important for you to understand that what we're proposing is not only going to move the state of Colorado towards an interim step of 80% of our energy coming from non-carbon sources, but also 100% by 2050. But it's going to be done so in a way that keeps our system reliable and affordable. If we propose anything that's not affordable to the majority, to everybody in our service territory, then it's not going to work. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to prove that to you tonight. Next slide, please. Fantastic. Just a quick update on who we are as a company. Xcel Energy really is 4 operating companies. Public Service Company of Colorado is still officially the name of the company that I work for, and the one that has been serving Colorado in one form or another for over 120 years. As you can see, we have been a nationally recognized leader in wind and solar for many, many years, for well over a decade. Not to mention also our carbon reduction efforts that began in 2005 and have led the nation in some of the best energy efficiency programs that are in the United States right now. Next. This is what we look like here in Colorado. As you can see, we are a fairly large company. We are the state's largest taxpayer. A lot of folks don't realize that, but we have 1.5 million electric customers, almost the same number of customers in the gas side, and we have a very good top quartile electric reliability. Next. So what we want to do is focus our efforts on not only limiting the environmental impact that our product has in the state of Colorado, but we want to do so in a way that boosts the Colorado economy. So right now we're already spending the majority of our money here with local vendors. We pay for over 4,300 jobs, and again, we're the state's largest taxpayer. Next. But our plan really is what we think is pretty bold. The 2018 announcement was to get our system and all of this, the energy sales to you, to be 80% carbon free by 2030. Our newest modeling is showing that's probably going to be more like 85%, and the majority of that will come from renewable energy. Then there's that last 20% between 2030 and 2050. That's a vision, and it is aspirational at this point, but we feel confident it's going to be attainable. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but what we're really planning on is to be agnostic to the technology that actually helps us get there. At this point, with current technology, we know that the wind and solar state of the art isn't going to get us to that 100%. We're going to need something that's going to be more energy dense and perhaps less impactful of its own on the environment. That last 20% will be a problem solved by somebody who's in middle school right now, or probably a lot of people at that age. Next. This is what our trend line looks like, and I think this is dramatic, and I'm very pleased to be able to show you how the black area, which is the coal, and the gray area, natural gas, that's our fossil fuel complement on our system. And as you can see, in 2021, we're crossing. In fact, this past year, we delivered 51% of our energy from non-carbon sources. So we're very excited about that. The red line is our renewable energy that's continually increasing. And the blue line, I think this is probably the most important line on here, is showing that we're going to be impacting customer bills about 2%, no more than 2%. In fact, this is in the plan per year. So the annual bill impact to our customers will be no more than 2%. Next. And please feel free to jump in and interrupt me and ask a question. I know I want to go fast just to make sure I get through everything, so you do have time to ask questions. So overall, though, our impact through this plan is going to be quite far-reaching. We're going to be looking at air emissions going down, coal ash, of course, going down with numerous coal plant closures. Obviously, the carbon emissions already, we're at 51% fewer today than we were in 2005, and we're using a lot less water. Next. So how are we going to do this? 85% reduction in carbon emissions from 2005 levels already on the books, already what we're planning. So 80% of that will come from renewable resources. So you're wondering, what does that mean? Carbon free is not necessarily wind and solar. It's not necessarily hydropower, which, by the way, in Colorado is not counted as renewable energy. We're working on changing that. But we know that technology in the future might involve something like carbon capture. Now, I know there's a lot of skepticism out there right now about carbon capture, and for good reason, but the technology isn't really fully developed, and we don't know for sure that it won't be an option available to us sometime down in the future. We're already beating what this country committed to in the Paris Accords. We're already beating the state's greenhouse gas roadmap expectations. I'm proud of that because a lot of folks around the country, and rightfully so, talk about these commitments that we've made internationally and how the country didn't, partake in those for some time and now is back in that agreement. I'm proud to say that Colorado is already ahead of all of that. Next. So we got three components, three legs to the stool, so to speak. Our Colorado Power Pathway is how we're going to get this new green energy to the population centers. It's going to be a new set of transmission power lines. And this is probably one of the most difficult and challenging sides of our business in the utility world. Finding places to put power lines and infrastructure so that we can get energy to the places where it's being used. We're going to be closing coal plants. In fact, by 2030, all but one generator in the state of Colorado will be closed. That one remaining is the largest one in Pueblo, the Comanche 3, but it'll be ramped down to 33% of what it's currently running at today. And then over the course of the next decade, will continue to be ramped down until 2040, when we close Comanche 3 completely 30 years ahead of schedule. Now you're wondering, how much did we pay to do, are we planning to pay to do that? It's a very good question. Again, bill impacts are not going to be any more than 2%. And what we're able to model right now is that by closing these coal plants early, we're going to save money. It's actually going to save money over keeping them open for their lifetimes. And then, of course, the new clean energy plan, adding clean energy, which is lots of wind and solar. In fact, the handouts I included with my presentation kind of lay this out for you. But for folks perhaps watching at home, we'll have about 2,300 new megawatts of wind, about 1,600 megawatts of new large-scale solar. That's the centralized solar plants that'll be out probably down in San Luis Valley. About 400 megawatts of battery storage is planned to go along with this. That helps us ride through periods of like today, where there's no sun at all. About 1,300 megawatts of new natural gas resources, and then 1,200 megawatts of distributed solar resources. Those are the solar panels that are on people's roofs. And so all of these are going to add up to the 80 to 85% carbon reduction by 2030. Next. And here's the Colorado Power Pathway. So we're going to cover each of these really quickly. As you can see, generally speaking, what we're talking about is building power lines out to the Eastern Plains and the southeastern part of the state, where the wind and solar resources are, of course, the greatest. It's always best to have steady wind and the highest quantity of solar energy to keep the prices low. And then we pipe all that energy back to the population centers with this new 560 miles of transmission line. It's about $1.7 billion investment, and we know that this is also going to spur the state's economy. Not to mention the fact that all of the landowners across, who will be having these new towers and power lines going through their properties will end up making money as well, while still being able to use their property as ranch, for example. Next. Here's the coal action plan, the retirements in their order of retirement. And as you can see, we're going to be adding some natural gas at our existing power plants to keep it very simple and keep it cost effective. Natural gas is still considered to be the necessary transition fuel for us. It's much cleaner than coal is, of course, and certainly doesn't involve strip mining or removing surface geology. So it is necessary for the time being. And we're hoping that, beyond the 2030 mark, we start seeing those new technologies coming in to allow us to transition entirely someday away from fossil fuels. And next. And then this is our new resource acquisition, as I just mentioned. A lot of wind, a lot of solar, both utility scale as well as distributed on people's roofs and battery storage. Next. So I throw this slide in only to remind me to let you know that last 20% is going to be about innovation and technology. This drone, for example, is something that we were not using as of 5 years ago. We were hiring helicopters with real humans in them to go out and patrol our power lines very carefully with LiDAR. Now we do it with drones, and to the extent we can. I mean, some of the most remote areas still have to be helicoptered, but what's great about this slide is that it reminds us that technology is constantly changing. The utility business has not been known over the years for being especially nimble when it comes to technology and incorporating new ways of business, but up until recently. And now we're moving very quickly because our market, our customers are telling us that this is what they want. And we also know that it's going to save money. Using this drone is a whole lot less expensive than using a helicopter with 2 humans on board for thousands of dollars an hour. Next. Electric vehicle vision. I think we've been trying very hard to communicate with our communities and our cities that what we're doing is trying to get as many charging stations as we can out on the roads and in our communities. Xcel Energy's goal is to have over 1.5 million EVs in our 8-state territory, and of course, a lot of them will be in Colorado, where of course we have our own almost 1 million vehicle goal, thanks to the governor. And EVs save money. They save money by saving on gas. And currently, at current prices, if you were to plug in instead of fill up at the tank or at the gas pump, you're spending about $1 or less per gallon equivalent. Next. And last but not least, we'd like to never lose the opportunity to tell our communities about energy efficiency for business and residential customers. We have some of the leading programs in the nation. We have over 160 of them. And right at the bottom is the easiest one for anyone who owns a home or would like to have their home run more efficiently. The Home Energy Squad can come out and for a very reduced price, do a full inspection and audit of your house. We can even do it remotely, which is something we instituted last year during the COVID crisis. So you can walk around the house with your cell phone and show us what's going on, and our people will do an audit. It's not as good as one in person, but if you definitely want to do it that way, we have that as an option. And then next. And as I said at the beginning, I am your chief point of contact. Please don't hesitate to write down my email. Reach out to me anytime. I'm here. And I would like to, again, respectfully ask if the city would consider writing a letter of support for our clean energy plan. And now I'll be happy to take questions.
Councilmember Duran-Malika.
Awesome, great. So Craig, thank you so much for being here. It's good to see you and meet you and get to know you. Preston obviously was around for a long time, so it's good to start a relationship with you. So one of the first questions is actually really just kind of taking a whole step back to the very beginning. Can you explain this PUC process a little bit more for me? So I have very limited experience with PUC and I'm learning more about their process. So how does this whole thing work? You submitted a plan to them. What happens now? What is the timeline in this? How does this whole thing work?
Yeah, great question. And I should also say that I come from the neighboring region in Boulder. So before I took over for Preston, I was in the Boulder region and Grant County. So I'm very familiar with all of this area. So I'm not coming in without a great deal of familiarity with your community and the communities that are in Preston's area. So a good question. Sometimes the Public Utilities Commission is seen as an impervious, impersonal, very difficult place to navigate. And it is for the average person, which is why the state of Colorado many years ago set up a state-funded organization called the Office of Consumer Counsel, which is a group of lawyers essentially who analyze everything that our company does on behalf of residential customers. So if you're a residential customer, yes, it would be great if you knew more about how the PUC works, but you don't have to. There are people actually working on your behalf as advocates at the commission to argue pretty much everything Xcel Energy wants to do. So the PUC is over a broad range of licensed organizations like taxi cabs and things like, carriers, but also there are two electric and natural gas utilities that they regulate, ours and Black Hills, which is primarily in the south side of the state. Xcel Energy is the largest utility that they regulate. And by regulate, I mean everything we do, we have to pass through a set of people who ultimately make decisions as to whether or not they think it's in the best good for our customers. And of course, they weigh all sorts of things, primarily cost, but also our obligation to serve. So we can't say no to somebody who wants to plug into our system if they're within our service territory. We have to serve those people. But we also can't just charge them anything we want, because the Public Utilities Commission is there to determine how we serve, how much it costs us to serve someone, what our reliability is. All of those things are regulated at the commission. And then the commission invites anyone in the state of Colorado to come in and provide testimony in these cases as well, which is why I'm asking for your support, because there can be people who come in and say, you know what, I don't want to spend an extra 2% of my bill to get all of this green energy. I'd rather just have all the coal energy. Thank you very much. I was fine with it the way it was. There's a lot of sensitivity about cost in the state of Colorado at every level. And so the communities have to be able to show the commission really wants to hear from the communities what you think about what's being proposed. So the process is we make a filing, the commission spends several months analyzing it. They have a staff of analysts and engineers and people who understand our business, who take everything apart and look at every spreadsheet and every assumption. And then they listen to the rest of Colorado to see what you think. And then the commission, who are 3 people, make a decision. The commission, the PUC itself, is appointed by the governor, and those 3 individuals actually bang a gavel and decide whether they approve what we do or not. And if they don't like it, they might send back suggestions on how to change it. And sometimes we negotiate our way through that. Does that help?
Yeah, it does help. So there's going to be a series of negotiations, right, over time, it seems like, and maybe
hearings.
Yeah,
there will be hearings, but it's my understanding that the commission is going to begin weighing all of this in summer, so we can't wait too long. It's not going to be, say, next year. We want to get this plan going by January.
Okay. All right, because one of the things that I'm just kind of worried about is, since, we're really at the beginning of this process, is it right for us to kind of jump in as a city right now? And especially since, I'd love to hear what other people are going to bring to the table. So, for example, I am on the Tri-County Board of Health. We have people on staff who are starting to weigh in on these issues around rulemaking processes and things like that. And so, I'd love to hear about what some of our experts are saying about this plan and how does it impact, specifically health purposes for the region, since that's something I'm really interested in and passionate about. And so I think that's probably just the only thing that I worry about, is just being too premature, I think, with deciding how this plan's going to go, because it sounds like it could change and fluctuate a little bit over time. Am I correct in that assumption?
Well, there might be some changes as to, for example, how many megawatts go in one basket versus another. But overall, no. I mean, we have ensconced our plan to be 80% carbon-free by 2030 and 100% by 2050 in Colorado law. So that is actually happening. This is sort of the roadmap for allowing it to happen. So the overall strategy is there, and that was signed into law by Governor Polis. Now we have to get that plan kind of fleshed out in terms of exactly what you buy and what you close and when you close it and when you buy it. All of that sort of thing is what we're putting down here in this plan. So yeah, things can change. I mean, maybe they would say, let's, rather than closing that coal generator in 2022, let's stretch it out to 2024, something like that. Mm-hmm. But as far as the major portions of this plan, it's pretty much what's going to happen if we're able to get it, through the commission. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And my final question is actually for Heather, just really quickly. Heather, is there, I know we typically haven't done this in the past, but especially during like legislative committee, there's a wealth of resource on your staff. And I'm just curious, like, have we gotten their input on this plan and what the city, what benefits our city? What are some things that we should consider? Can that be part of this process?
Certainly, it can be part of the discussion. Becky Smith should be with us tonight. I thought she was going to be on. I'm not seeing her though. She is familiar with the process and the program based on the work that the city's doing. So if there's any specific questions, certainly we can provide you with additional information, but staff does keep a pulse on what's happening. And so, one of the things, so the simple answer is yes. Yeah, I'll stop there and then there's any other questions.
Thanks, Heather. That's all the questions I have for now. There's a couple other hands up, so thank you so much.
And Councilor Mullica, we can make our own legislative folks available to you if you have questions about our legislative process and strategy, because we're down there. We have our own people at the Capitol all the time, working with the Senate and the House, kind of outlining what our goals are and helping them make decisions as well. So happy to make them available too.
Great, thank you.
Yes, okay.
Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Mayor, and welcome to Craig. It's nice to meet you. And there are a lot of really great things in this plan. We all want to reach that zero, fossil fuel goal. My brain is a little bit, the weather is probably affecting it. But I do have a couple questions. Sure. I have looked at this and looked at some other, what some other people have said about the plan. And so there are a couple, and some of the things that you presented today. First of all, what exactly is a dispatchable resource? Because you've got that on slide 12, and I want some clarification on that.
Yeah, that was the natural gas I was talking about. Okay,
and that explains why in some of the material, not in your PowerPoint, but that we got, shows between 2026 and 2030 that natural gas is generation, I guess, is going up. And I have to say that I have residents and people who ask me, who think of natural gas as just as unhealthy and not good for the environment as the coal. And so I'm just kind of wondering why. And you also talked about converting the Pawnee plant into natural gas. So I want to know, are you, as part of this plan, are you building or making more new plants or whatever you want to call them that for natural gas? And how do we explain to people that this is going to be a good thing instead of, not doing more natural gas?
Yes, totally a great question. As I was mentioning before, we're going to be building just under 1,300 megawatts of new natural gas resources, and the majority of that will go at existing power plants where coal is currently being burned. And so, as I mentioned, the natural gas is what we still call a transition fuel. I know a lot of folks have, I think it's been at least 10 or 15 years that I first heard somebody say, we're done with the transition. We don't need to do that. There's no reason to transition through natural gas to get where we want to be, which is a carbon-free energy supply. It didn't turn out to be true. We absolutely need firm resources in order to back up the wind and solar, particularly for days just like today, where even out on the eastern plains, my wife and my daughter are driving through Kansas, and they went out through Lyman, through all of those big wind turbines that Xcel Energy has, and not one of them was turning today. It just is a reality that we're still facing with renewable resources. And so in the meantime, we're going to have this transition. It's going to require fossil fuel, natural gas, which I know a lot of folks have problems with. But it's less carbon emitting, and it certainly is lower in all other emissions than coal. And we will no longer be driving trains of coal down from Wyoming, as we have been for decades, sometime beyond 2040. And that's a really good thing to say, because these plants we were planning to run them until the 2050s and 2060s.
So there is a deadline in mind for not using natural gas.
It is not written down just yet. No, it's not.
All right. And then,
yeah, go ahead.
So I guess go ahead.
As you saw that trend line, that graph that showed the declining fossil fuel use, that's the trend line. It doesn't go to zero just yet, but it will. And it will be at some point, as I'd mentioned before, carbon-free might not necessarily mean fossil fuel-free. It'll just mean that the fossil fuels no longer emit carbon into the atmosphere.
Oh, okay, thank you. And then the other question I have is, I don't know, maybe it's really more of a comment. It's just looking into this proposal. It seems like there are 7 portfolios, which are like options as far as I'm understanding it. And Xcel has picked one. And I'd just like to have a little bit more time to look into all these portfolios and try to decide, like what, weigh the pros and cons. That's kind of my concern. This seems very complex.
No, it is. I don't doubt. I agree with you there. So take your time, take a look at it, and send questions back. And I'll have all the experts in my company answer them for me. Happy to do it.
All right. I think that's probably what I had. Yeah, that'll do it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Dahl.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilford.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and welcome to you, Craig. I feel like our paths have crossed somewhere and I just can't figure out why or how. And so if you have any ideas, definitely let me know, because I can't quite put my finger on it.
Now you've got me thinking.
I know, but it's good to have you here this evening.
Thank you.
Also great to hear about what Xcel has been up to. I certainly am a big fan of the transportation electrification plan that you all championed at the PUC earlier this year. And I think it's going to be really fantastic for Coloradans, specifically in your territory, to be able to take advantage of all of the great programs that you all have put forward there. So I do have a number of questions for you based on the proposal that you all are putting forward. Because I guess the way I'm understanding it is, with the PUC having time to, go through discovery and ask questions and do their own analysis, that, they'll ultimately get to decide many aspects of what is approved. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, cool. So when it comes to gas, I know my colleague was just asking a number of questions about the amount of gas that, you all have put forward. Is there a point in which the PUC will do some sort of assessment and look at what you all are proposing, as well as what customers are using, and identify whether those two things are matching up? Does that make sense?
Well, I think they use multiple ways of evaluating a proposal. And our proposal comes in with as much supporting documentation as we feel like we can present. And it involves pages and pages. I mean, literally thousands of pages of testimony and spreadsheets to show the justification for this plan. Mm-hmm. And then, other people will bring in their own spreadsheets. And then, of course, the OCC, the Office of Consumer Counsel, and staff will begin to tear it all apart and look at every single line.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that what you all proposed may not be what is included in the final plan, and especially when it comes to dispatchable resources.
Yeah, that could change. It could change.
That's good to know. I guess the other question I had, just since we were kind of starting on dispatchable resources and picking up where my colleague left off, is, has there been any thought given to if renewable resources could save customers in the long term instead of building out additional, gas capacity? And are there any concerns, based on what we saw in February in Texas?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's definitely a concern that our company has been, proudly, we didn't have as great of a spike as they did in other states, particularly Texas and New Mexico. But, we did have a spike in natural gas prices. So you're absolutely right. That is something that you have to manage going through. Currently, the costs, you'll hear this from environmental activists, the cost of wind and solar has never been lower, which is why we know we can look at wind and solar as a fuel source. Rather, it's less of a philosophy when it comes down to money than it is just looking at it as a source of fuel and a place to get electrons. And so, yes, wind and solar, even with battery storage, is really, really affordable. But the problem is it still isn't 100% available. And that's why you have to have something that carries you through and is there to back it up. But what our company actually led the nation in, thanks to an investment we made in 2009, I believe, with the National Center for Atmospheric Research, it was a time when we felt like we were getting hammered by wind, leading us and pulling us in directions and causing us to react. We decided that we wanted to get ahead of the wind and then ahead of the solar. And so we hired NCAR and NREL to work on a wind forecasting tool that has so far saved us tens of millions of dollars in fuel, because now we get 15-minute incremental forecasts for all of our wind and solar resources. So now we can stay ahead of the curve instead of always behind it. That was an important investment we made, and that technology has now gone to other utilities around the country. But it still shows us that tomorrow there might be zero wind on the system, or there might be 1,000 megawatts on the system. We manage that now very well by ramping up and pulling down our fossil fuel resources ahead of schedule so that we don't spend more on fuel than we have to. We default to the wind and solar first, and then we manage our system up to those resources, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I'm sorry, I have so many questions, and Mayor, I'm going to try and I'm going to temper it down. Don't worry. I'm just curious, Craig, what's the average cost per megawatt for solar or for wind? I mean, obviously, I know you can't give us, in Northglenn, it's this amount, but can you give us just an average sense of what that costs per megawatt hour?
Not this moment. I'm going to have to collect that for you and get back with you. It's changed over the years, but I will get it for you. I promise.
Okay.
So what I think would be helpful is what are our assumptions as part of this filing to give you an idea.
No, I appreciate. Yeah, if you want to share an assumption in terms of what that price is per megawatt hour, I'd certainly be interested in that. But if we're going in a different direction, I prefer that maybe you just follow up.
No, that's right. So would it help for me to tell you what we're proposing in this filing, the prices for solar and wind would be?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, great. You can do that.
Okay, awesome.
I'll copy everybody when I respond to them.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful for everybody just to see the cost comparison, because I do pay attention to this stuff, and I know that that there was an investigatory report that was published by PUC staff in March 2021 regarding the Comanche 3 plant that you referenced earlier in your presentation that is in Pueblo, and you all are planning on keeping that online until 2040. And one of the big concerns I had is that according to that report from the PUC staff, they found that the cost of electricity from that plant, which is, just unfortunately really ineffective and has, been shut down for over 700 days since it first opened, that the cost of operating that plant or the cost of electricity from that plant is roughly $66.25 for each megawatt hour. And I just can't imagine that wind or solar, would be more expensive than that. I would think it would be significantly less expensive. So it just kind of boggles my mind a little bit, that you guys are going to continue to keep Comanche online when it's so expensive for ratepayers. And, there are obviously the environmental justice concerns as well, but the fact that it was closed, what was it, 2020 and part of 2021 for 373 days it's just a little concerning to me. And so I'm just curious how you guys can reconcile keeping a plant like that that's, so bad for the environment continuing to stay open.
Well, it is not as good for the environment as new natural gas, that's for sure, or new wind, but we're keeping the resources on our system that will keep our system reliable. And Comanche 3, even though it was down, it definitely was down. It was at a very difficult time for us this past year. We're going to need it until 2040, but in a reduced capacity. But in answer to your specific question, it's this much, it's $66 a megawatt hour. And I don't know that number, but I'll take your word for it. We also are keeping the wind on the system that we paid $150 a megawatt hour because we paid for it. We bought it years ago when we were beginning this push to become the nation's wind leader. We deliver more wind energy to our customers than any other utility in the country has, and we've been doing that for over 12 years. So you make investments and then prices change. That's the reality of anyone's utility. It's how things work. It's the same, whatever vehicles you paid for as a city 10 years ago might be a lot less expensive today, or equipment in your shop. I mean, those sorts of things happen. But Comanche 3 has been very helpful for us, for Xcel Energy and for the state of Colorado and multiple utilities in this beginning this very strong and aggressive transition to intermittent renewable resources. It's helped us do that. And that's why it's valuable still for another 18 to 20 years. And who knows, it might get sped up. We don't know. But we do know that as of 2030, it will be ramped back considerably. And to your point, it'll be replaced with less expensive resources, which is why this is a justifiable plan. That's why this plan is not going to cost our customers more than 2% per year.
Great. I appreciate your response there. And I unfortunately think we'll have to agree to disagree that natural gas is a clean energy source. But that's a conversation we can have over a beer sometime, Craig. I guess the last question I had was, how is Xcel gonna, are you working with any communities to build local renewable energy? So that we're not adding to the need for, more big fossil fuel plants in the future, or converting plants from coal to gas in the future, as well as within this ERP?
Well, I'd love to ask you, does the city of Northglenn have any spare property around right now that you'd like to dedicate to a low-income dedicated solar garden? Because we're ready to place one right now.
Well, I'm going to let the city manager follow up with you on that one. I think we have some opportunities, but I would definitely be interested in what you all are proposing.
Yeah, give some thought to that. So yes, here's how we're working with our communities. And this is something you mentioned, social equity, I think, or equality. We're working with the towns of Hayden and Craig and Pueblo in what we call a just transition away from coal, which currently is a major part of those communities' economies. So it's easy for those of us who don't live in a town where there's a major industrial facility like a coal plant to say, let's just shut it down tomorrow and then not worry about what happens to that local economy and all of those jobs. So what's great about this plan that's before the Public Utilities Commission is that we have built in a very strategic and structured plan to help those communities transition away from this line of work, this business, in a way that will keep them whole. It'll help them retrain. In Pueblo, for example, I think it represents $80 million of tax revenue per year. You can imagine what that would mean if it just closed up tomorrow to those folks. So I'm really excited about this plan being able to address that issue in a responsible way.
Great. Well, I certainly appreciate the conversation and you being so willing to take these questions, Craig. Well, I guess, from my perspective, I feel like there are just so many questions still that we as a council have to be able to answer. And, this is a really complicated process at the PUC, and I don't see them wrapping it up before the end of the year. So I think we've got a little bit of time to continue to discuss, how and where we want to weigh in on this particular proposal. And I would just advocate that we, spend some time, do our due diligence, and then make a decision about sending a letter later this summer. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Please don't hesitate to continue sending questions. We'll be happy to answer them.
So I don't see any more hands for questions, but I was wondering if other council members wanted to weigh in on the request from Craig to offer support. When I look at the draft of the letter, I personally don't have any reservations. So I'd love to hear from other council members. Councilmember Peterson?
Thanks, Mayor. I agree. I see no problems with it. I think it's proactive. I think questions are emerging that need to be asked and answered, but I think it's a proper step in the right direction. It's in line with our city goals, and I support it.
I see a thumbs up from Antonio. Councilmember Downing?
Well, I gave you a thumbs up, but I welcome Craig.
Thank you.
It was good to hear all you had to say, and it's very interesting, some of the comments and questions that our other counselors had. But I really don't have any issues with the letter the way it is, so I would support it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Witkovich?
Thank you, Mayor. I would agree with you guys, Council Members Downing, Peterson, and the Mayor. I think the questions are great and they should be answered, but I also have no reservations about signing this letter of support.
Thank you.
Councilmember Goff?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my feeling at this particular moment is not to sign the letter immediately because we might want to add something to it. If there's a particular item that we felt we'd like to, highlight or bring forward, that we felt was important to Northglenn. That's my only concern. It seems to be so much in there, and I really do appreciate the big picture of what's going on here and trying to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and keep the costs down. But I just thought if we looked at it in more detail, there might be something that we could say, we really especially want, because it's possible things could change. They're going to be working out some of the details that we could include something that we really wanted to stay in the proposal as we understand it. So I'm not really ready to send it off today. Let me just put it that way.
Well, it seems like it's 4-3 tonight. Can I get some clarification, Councilmember Goff? Because I'm looking at the letter. Maybe, Craig, could you kind of maybe summarize the purpose and the intent of the letter of support? Because I guess I'm not quite sure where and if it would be appropriate to add. I don't know if that's the purpose tonight. So could you clarify, Craig?
Sure. Really what we're hoping is that folks can generally express support for the direction that we've decided to take on behalf of our customers in the state of Colorado. If you want to get more technical and more detailed about items that are in the proposed plan, of course, I'm not here to dictate how you write your letter of support. I'm just asking for one. And I'm wondering, maybe just procedurally speaking, it might be helpful for me to get sort of a drop dead date that the commission would say is when they'll be evaluating all of the letters that we're receiving from our community. So you know what I mean? So in other words, it would help for you to know that, say, beyond a certain date, these letters would be of little or no value because the commission will have already begun the deliberations and considered all of that input. Do you know what I mean? So why don't I get that for you? So then those of you on council who are thinking maybe we don't want to jump too quickly into this would then have a better idea as to what the pacing looks like in the runway that's ahead of us.
Thank you. That's really helpful. That was my understanding as well, is that it because I believe what I've heard is a lot of support for the goals being set forward and a clean energy plan. So a couple more comments. Mayor Pro Tem Wilford.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't know that there's a procedural schedule out yet for this docket, so I think it might be more than a couple of weeks before we have a sense of when a letter would have to be sent. The other thing I just wanted to flag is that, you know, I know that many council members didn't receive this CC4CA memo until an hour before the meeting, but I would really encourage you all to take a moment and read that, especially because we do take the lead of CC4CA when it comes to our positions on many environmental policies, whether it's at the legislature, at the PUC, or at the AQCC. And as a member jurisdiction, that's been a really powerful resource for us. And so I know in the past, council's been, you know, relatively reluctant to dive in on updating our sustainability plan because there's just a little bit of a gap of knowledge. And I think one of the great things about CC4CA is they do a really excellent job of laying out what's on the line. And one of the things that, you know, they've identified for us is that there really is no procedural urgency right now to get a letter in. And, you know, getting letters in early feels like we're playing politics instead of actually taking time to look at the plan and be thoughtful. And it's also, you know, we're sending a letter before any outside experts have had a chance to fully understand what the plan does. And long before, you know, external input is important. So I appreciate that there are other council members who look at the letter and think it's harmless, but the PUC really does take into consideration the thoughts and the expressions of local governments. And that's why I think it's so important that we pause a little bit and make sure that everybody fully understands what is in this plan, as well as the environmental justice concerns and impacts on other communities, ours included. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Duran-Mullica.
Yeah, so I think the only thing I was really going to just add is just a suggestion. I mean, if folks really want to move forward with this letter as is, the only thing, or like a general letter of support, as you know, Craig says that this is just like a general letter. I mean, we could add language to here that says, you know, at first glance or in general, we support the direction of this plan. And, you know, we will continue to review this material. And, you know, if we have any other suggestions or anything like that, then, you know, we'll come back to you or something. I don't know, like obviously like wordsmith it way better than that. This is just my idea off the top. But I mean, like with Catherine's point, you know, if there is an issue that, you know, council wants to bring forward and really discuss and want to follow it, then, I mean, you know, it kind of leaves room open for that. But it clarifies that this is just a general, you know, support for the plan. But yet, I mean, this process is just starting. There's lots to learn. There's lots of us who still have a lot more to learn about this, me being number one, I'll be honest with you. And so, I mean, I think, you know, we could add that language into here as well, you know, to kind of bridge that gap. Just a suggestion.
I think that's a brilliant suggestion. So I don't know who, Craig, if it would be you or Heather, that would draft the new letter. I think all of the phrases that Councilmember Mullica used would be appropriate because that's what we were saying, right? General support, we have more questions, we have more things to learn. I don't know, we could play the tape back maybe and quote Councilmember Mullica, because I think it offered that clarity and it addresses concerns that have been raised, but also honors the fact that 4 people do support moving forward. So I think that's a really nice compromise. City Manager Guyer.
So the letter is already drafted for the packet next week. So I'll make the changes to the letter based on council direction tonight. I would ask that as CC4CA moves forward in their evaluation, that Catherine and Jenny, we stay in close communication with what review and effort they're making in terms of following the proceeding, so that way I can make sure staff's up to speed, and we're providing council what we need to be providing you in terms of if there's an issue or something that you want to send an additional letter or through that process, that we're up to speed on that. So I'll tweak the letter tomorrow, and it'll be included in the packet for council's consideration next week.
Great, thank you. Craig, do you have any final thoughts before we move ahead?
I appreciate all of the questions. This is great to have an engaged board like this. I really do appreciate all the thoughtful questions, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have more. I'm certainly not the expert on this filing, and I'd be happy to get somebody from our regulatory side or even from our legislative side to talk directly with anyone who'd like to ask more questions.
Awesome.
So thank you for this time. It's been a whole, what has it been, an hour already? Goodness gracious. That's very generous of you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. It was nice to meet you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks. Okay, we are moving into the Croak Reservoir Subcommittee recommendations. So anyone who wants to join us for this one, we have Amanda Peterson, Director of Parks, Recreation, and Culture is here, and she's going to introduce our item. Welcome, Amanda.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I do have several individuals who are joining for the presentation tonight, including Tamara Burke, who is the subcommittee chair, and Andy Hall, who's our Parks and Recreation Advisory Board chair. In addition, we do have at least one other member of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board that I see joined in tonight, and several graduate students from Regis University who contributed very significantly towards the development of the final recommendations. So they're going to both jump in and share some of their findings a little later in the presentation. And if you don't mind opening up the PowerPoint.
Will do.
Realized I was jumping ahead without it. Okay, we can move on to the next slide.
Introductions, yep, process.
So I'm going to start by just talking a little bit about the process that the board and the subcommittee went through to be at a point to present you with their finding and recommendations this evening. You can go on to the next slide.
Okay.
So just as a quick refresher, because it feels like a really long time ago, the subcommittee was formed following a petition that was submitted to the city regarding Croak Reservoir as an outcome of the special ordinance that was approved in October of 2018. And part of that special ordinance referred the formation of a Parks and a subcommittee for Croak Reservoir. In February of 2019, after kind of figuring out what that committee might look like, the Parks and Rec Advisory Board did move forward with the formation of the committee. And the committee met between 2019 and 2021. They made their recommendations to the Parks and Rec Advisory Board in March of 2021, as per what was outlined in that special ordinance. And then tonight, the board, along with committee, is here to share with you those recommendations. We can move on to the next slide. So just as a brief overview about how the subcommittee was formed, the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board identified a process and made applications available community-wide. They received 13 applications and scheduled all of those for interviews. Not everybody chose to participate in an interview, and not everybody chose to participate throughout the whole process, but all of those applicants were invited to participate in the subcommittee. We had 6 individuals listed on the right there that were really actively involved throughout the entire process. So I just wanted to take a moment tonight to send out a big thank you to all of them. They made a tremendous commitment, and really every one of them was there because of their passion for their neighborhood and Croak Reservoir and wanting to see really positive outcomes. So I wanted to say thank you to all of them for the work that they put in and the recommendations that you're going to see tonight. I hope that you will be pleased with the work that they did. We can move on to the next slide. So the very first subcommittee meetings were really spent trying to share information. So those initial meetings, there were a lot of conversations about water rights and water quality standards, about parks maintenance, about harmful algae blooms and the water quality measures that were already in place. From there, really started to developing what were the other topics of interest that those committee members had. And the ones that kind of rose to the top were crime and safety, wildlife habitat impacts, and domestic animal regulation. So we brought in experts in each of those areas, both from within the city as well as from other organizations like the Colorado Division of Parks and Wildlife. Next slide, please. Some of the highlights that came out of some of the future subcommittee meetings as the group started brainstorming and identifying issues and priorities were the safety or perception of safety, dogs and nuisance wildlife, the cleanliness of the park, environmental degradation, and water levels and water quality. And you'll see an asterisk by those first 4, which really seem to be a priority for the majority of the committee members and attendees. There's a list on the right of some possible solutions that were initially identified, and it really was an ongoing conversation about, what are all of the possibilities, and then what makes the most sense to implement as we go forward. You can move to the next slide. So some of the initial outcomes from those first meetings were a community workshop to address some of the challenges around nuisance wildlife and gain a better understanding of the kind of where the differences were between domestic animals and nuisance wildlife and who to call and how to call. We had about 15 community members who participated in that workshop. They did outreach and observation, whether it be attending a Ward 4 meeting and surveying the attendees, or the subcommittee also went to the reservoir and observed and documented the uses so that they had that information in doing their brainstorming. And then animal control and police response. In one of the conversations that the committee had directly with our animal control and police officers, made that request for additional patrol and additional resources in that area. We can move on to the next. So there were challenges and there were opportunities. Each of the committee members, as I mentioned, felt so passionately about what improvements, how we might be able to improve Croak Reservoir. But there were different priorities. So it was taking a little bit of time to really come up with some final recommendations that everyone could agree upon. And that process was really getting pretty close to completion. It wasn't quite there, but it was getting close in March of 2020. And then we had COVID. So that kind of threw a little wrench in things for a bit. And there was a pause in the subcommittee meetings. And as we made it through summer and all of the challenges that existed last year, Tamara, as the chair, brought forward an idea to have some fresh perspective and was able to invite students, some graduate students from Regis University, to conduct a National Environmental Policy Act review process utilizing Croak Reservoir as their sample study. So they did research and assessment, provided feedback, and presented their findings over the course of several months. We can move to the next slide. So those students conducted their research and did observations, got feedback from the subcommittee members, and then presented their findings back to the subcommittee and the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. And the subcommittee, as well as the board members, were really excited about what was brought forward. And finally, we're at a point of achieving that consensus that we were seeking. You can go on to the next slide. So that was a kind of a quick overview, but I really wanted most of this conversation to be from Tamara and Andy. So Tamara's going to talk to you in a little more detail about the findings and recommendations that the students and the committee brought forward. So I'll turn it over to you, Tamara.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda. I want to apologize in advance. There is a faint sound of a baby crying in the background. I know we've all been dealing with this virtual environment. I'm a mom and it's the evening, so I'm sorry. He did really good during Xcel though. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Tamara Burke. I'm the chair of the Croak-Reservoir subcommittee. I've also had the privilege of teaching a graduate level class titled Environmental Assessment and Regulation at Regis University. And as Amanda mentioned, two of those students are here with me tonight. I'll allow them to introduce, or they will introduce themselves later on in the presentation when they share their material. But this is a really exciting milestone and looking forward to being here before you. Next slide. So the recommendations that we brought forth or are bringing forth are titled Recommendations to Improve and Enhance the Croak-Reservoir Nature Area for Current and Future Use. We have taken a look at the challenges and issues that are at Croak-Reservoir, and these recommendations we believe can help fix those issues today and into the future. Next slide, please. I did want to share some background with everyone to kind of help set up the information that follows. Croak-Reservoir is really interesting. I'm not sure if many know, but it was actually constructed as an irrigation pond in the late 1800s. And just that aspect alone and the generation that this small body of water spans, generations that the small body of water spans, just is really cool to me. And I'm so lucky that I get to look out my back door every day and see it. And so I think that that's something that should be celebrated. In the 1980s, the city of Thornton sold Croak-Reservoir to the city of Northglenn. And in 2006, after a volley of water rights and storage rights, Northglenn finally acquired Croak-Reservoir, and they began a major renovation project to stabilize the eastern shoreline. So hopefully you have all visited Croak-Reservoir. It's such a wonderful little park. So the design that you see today was part of that project. Since that renovation project, Croak-Reservoir, in the eyes of many residents, began to experience some social and environmental challenges that really brought forth and gained traction for this subcommittee to come together and try and resolve. So as Amanda mentioned, in 2018, we came together as a subcommittee and started brainstorming and doing some work. The process was slow and it was difficult to figure out where to start and how to keep going. This was new to Northglenn, forming a subcommittee like this, I believe, through Parks and Rec. So we were really paving the way and trying to figure out where this was going to go. COVID hit, so we took a break. But in 2020, we joined efforts with Regis University, and Croak-Reservoir became a final project for them, which is really, really awesome. And here we are today. Next slide, please. As Amanda mentioned, we've identified both as a subcommittee and the graduate students some issues that are really prevalent at Croak-Reservoir. And these issues are used as a baseline for the students' project as well. but they fall into three different categories. And the first one is just the misuse of park rules and the lack of enforcement. So often you see pets and bicycles on trail. There's been frequent overnight camping, and there's lots of fishing in non-designated areas. I think it's becoming a more and more popular fishing spot. And so just that real estate for anglers is getting really dense. And so they're using all different parts of the shoreline to fish. And that's creating some issues and environmental degradation. A lot of off-trail trampling is happening as anglers try and get to their desired fishing spots. It's causing a lot of shoreline erosion. And water quality was a big topic of conversation. We recognize, both as a subcommittee and the students as well, with their backgrounds, that it's something that is a pertinent issue, but it's being addressed within the city of Northglenn, and we very much appreciate that. We see that there's mitigation strategies in place, especially to mitigate harmful algal blooms. And thankfully tonight, the low water level is not too much of an issue because of all this rain. And Croak Reservoir is a stormwater retention pond. So that is the only flow that comes into that water body, body of water. Pardon me, thank you. I apologize in advance for how text heavy this slide is. I am going to read it to you, but this was just a succinct paragraph that the students put together as part of their project to help set the stage for why these recommended actions are needed. So the purpose of the recommended actions is to provide improvements to Croak Reservoir that address the current issues experienced in its management in order to support the long-term viability and enjoyment of the reservoir for the surrounding community and the environment. The need for the action is demonstrated through the following factors. Destabilization of the south bank threatens the longevity of the reservoir and safety of the visiting public. You can often see people trying to utilize really muddy patches and slipping and all of that. And so the use of desire paths, which are these paths that are carved out voluntarily off trail to get where they want to go. So the use of those desire paths degrades vegetation and aids in bank erosion. Fishing occurs in non-designated areas, promoting off-trail use and bank destabilization. There's a disregard for park rules, which undermines the original vision and goal for the reservoir and threatens the wildlife, plants, soil, and tranquility of the reservoir. Croak Reservoir is deemed a wildlife refuge. So there is a strong desire to keep that intent. But we know that the community is ever changing and it's also used as a corridor. So it's difficult. And lastly, the surrounding community has requested and is supportive of this action. Next slide, please. So through the work that we've done as a subcommittee, it was difficult to come forward with a list of actions that we felt we all agreed on and were reasonable and feasible to bring to Parks and Rec and Council. And so the following are those recommendations. The first one, the subcommittee would like to bring forward is the development and implementation of public engagement strategies. We would really like to see Northglenn utilize social media platforms and the Northglenn Connection to do write-ups about Croak Reservoir and share the unique history and the amenities that are in this wonderful park. We really believe it's going to foster community awareness, increase visitation, and in turn also encourage environmental stewardship, which is so badly needed for our park. Next slide, please. At this time, I'm actually going to pass it to Dylan Brown, who's a graduate student with Regis University, and I'll let him introduce himself and take it away.
Hi, my name is Dylan. I am a graduate student in the environmental biology program at Regis University, and real excited to kind of show you what we've been getting into and some of the research that we've done to try to address some of these problems at Croak Reservoir. So what we kind of are focusing on mostly is the impacts to vegetation and off-trail activities. Through peer-reviewed research, we saw that in recreation areas, trampling of vegetation when the public walks off trail is one of the most damaging impacts to an environment, both for soils and for vegetation. And going forward, we tried to identify some solutions, and we stumbled upon quite a few studies, both in urban and in national parks that have been conducted. One really prevalent one occurred in Arcadia National Park and determined that adequate signage and fencing drastically reduced damage to vegetation and soils, which would help with the bank erosion of the south side, as was previously indicated. So getting into our recommended action, we would like to have consistent signage around every single entrance of the park. There are conflicting signage. There's some rules on some entrances and others on other entrances. So we would just like to kind of take all those signs down, put up ones that are consistent throughout. And a big focus was making sure we preserve this nature area aesthetically. So we were very aware of sign pollution. We don't want to be overly intrusive with hanging up more signs or putting them in areas they don't really belong. So we would just repurpose where they already are to cut down on any kind of sign pollution. Other ideas that were put forward was footer signage that would be placed at the informal paths or the desire paths that we indicated a little earlier. So anything that walks down to the shore that kind of shouldn't, you'll have a sign there reminding you that you probably shouldn't do that. Other rules that we would like to kind of really show the public that we're being a little firm on is bikes and any kind of pets. And so the idea would be to have painted signs down on all the trails. So as you're walking in, it's right at your feet that you kind of know what you're doing is not allowed at this nature area. And then another problem that we identified is the prevalence of overnight camping. And so it really is affecting the western side where the most vegetation is in the reservoir. And so we wanted to make sure that everyone understands the rules for overnight camping, that it's not allowed, and then also give the public an opportunity to have some phone numbers or resources to call to try to mitigate any of the overnight camping. And if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, so in addition to the signage, we would also like to install fencing along the western edge of the reservoir. And the western edge of the reservoir was picked because it houses wetland area and is flooded routinely, which means the soils and the vegetation is a lot weaker and a lot more susceptible to being trampled and causing long-term damage. Also, due to the thick vegetation, it's a favorite place to have overnight camping and illegal camping because it's really hard to see back there. So by installing a fence, it'd be a psychological barrier more than an actual physical barrier to stop someone. And that is going to reduce trampling, as saw in our peer-reviewed articles at Arcadia National Park and other urban environments. So like I said earlier, it'll discourage overnight camping. But the reason why we didn't want to make it a really intrusive fence is so that the aesthetic appeal of the nature area is preserved. We wouldn't want a big chain link fence kind of messing things up when you're trying to go for a hike with the family. All right, yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so what we kind of indicated here that you can see in the map is that we would run it along that western edge of the reservoir. So we can try to just discourage people from using some of these desire pathways. A lot of it is from angler pressure as well. There's a lot of good fishing over there. So we would hope that putting this up would kind of indicate that, hey, we really don't want you here, and also cue in other people of the public that are visiting to kind of call someone out and be like, I don't think you're supposed to be over there. And going along with trying not to impact the aesthetic appeal, we recommended that there be 360 feet of fence as indicated at the map. 36 posts would be placed about 10 feet apart. And that's just to try to make less of an impact, less noticeable. There would be minimal maintenance associated with it, so long as cedar or pressure treated wood is used. And in addition, nylon rope of some sort would be a little bit more resistant to any kind of PV damage that might happen. So it should be pretty low cost. And as far as maintenance, you should have very, very little of it. And we'll go to the next slide. And I'll hand it over to Sam.
Hello, I'm Sam Ortega. I am also a Regis graduate student in the Environmental Biology Master's Program. So just kind of going off what Dylan said, so in addition to the signage, the fencing, you would also want to develop a new fishing area. And you can see in that picture that that southernmost tip of Croak Reservoir is one of the most degraded areas. It's also one of the most popular fishing areas. So what we would like to do is develop an existing desire path, as we kind of had talked about before, where people are creating those paths down to the water. And we would create a new fishing area that has a concrete pad, a path, and then ideally a bench for sitting. And then by adding that additional recreation area, there should be not only a reduction of environmental impacts to that ecosystem, but would also be safer. As Tamara had pointed out, it's very dangerous when we get these rains and it becomes muddy and slippery, and people can really hurt themselves as they try to walk down to fish in that area. Additionally, we would like to maintain ADA standards. So by doing so, we would not install any railing on that fishing area, but rather we would have edge protection just to prevent wheelchairs and things from going over into the water, and just allow for extra accessibility for people in wheelchairs who would like to go down to the new fishing area as well. Again, this is something that we feel is important, not only because it's going to be beneficial for the community in the sense of just creating that new fishing area and a little bit more recreation for the community, but it will also stabilize the shoreline, which is going to be really important in just maintaining the reservoir as a whole. And then again, just making it more safe and accessible for everyone. Next.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dylan and Sam. Wonderful explanations of those recommended actions. Lastly, the last recommended action the subcommittee would like to bring forward is an increase in enforcement in the area. It's something that we support as a subcommittee, but it's also something that we heard from the greater community as we did surveys and attended Ward 4 meetings. And we also believe that Northglenn has heard this, and they've already implemented increased patrols in the area. But we just would like to emphasize that we want that effort to continue. Used in conjunction with updated signage and these other new improvements, there really is a greater safety for all visitors, especially in light of recent events and how quickly things are changing. We just know that an increased presence of patrol in that area could be of great benefit to all visitors. Next slide, please. Just in summary, we recommend these actions to improve all aspects of the nature area. We really would like to see Croak Reservoir be around in its current state or better for the long term. We would like you to prioritize and implement this as a package for optimal improvement. Just as a note about the subcommittee, our work is not over. We would like to continue to be a voice for Croak Reservoir, and we're continuing to brainstorm for future opportunities to collaborate and expand on the work that we've done thus far. And that includes additional illustrated signage and partnering with other schools, elementary schools, maybe getting some of their nature artwork out there, and just to continue to expand this effort. But mostly, I thank you for your time and your consideration, and it's very wonderful to be here. Next slide.
Sorry, there's more slides. I thought, oh, there are. I apologize. I will go back. I hit the summary slide and thought you were done.
No, that's okay. And yeah, really, this might be the most important slide, just
right.
because I want to give a really big thanks to Regis University and just taking on this collaborative effort. The students in the class were really, really excited to take part in this project. And in a big way, they fell in love with Crook Reservoir and the stories that we shared and the issues that we brought before them. And it's actually been a really unique opportunity for graduate students, taking them through this whole process and having them stand before Parks and Rec advisory boards. And we did a whole scoping meeting with other community members. So for them to be part of that whole process is just really cool. And hopefully it's something that we can continue to expand on in Northglenn in many different facets. But these guys totally dived in and made it such a wonderful experience. I also want to thank the subcommittee members. They've done great work. They were honest and true and really brought forward some unique issues that were important to them, and it really helped with these deliverables today. And then Northglenn Parks and Recreation, they supported this entire effort. Amanda facilitated wonderful meetings, and Belia was amazing with the meeting minutes, and yeah, special thanks. Couldn't have done it without them, and they continued to help us get here today. So special thanks to them. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. So as a Regis Ranger myself, I want to say thank you. I was also on faculty for about 10 years, and I love the students, and I really, really appreciate the work you did. It was very thoughtful, and it was just a pleasure to hear your presentation tonight. So thank you. Do other council members have comments or questions for the group?
Mayor, excuse me.
Yes.
Sorry, we had a bit of a presentation in a presentation. So there are.
Oh, there's another one. Oh my goodness, we keep going. I love it. Okay, here we go.
So
Mr.
Andy
Hall,
Andy Hall, as the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board Chair, is going to jump in with recommendations, or with a board recommendation.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Council, for inviting us here tonight. So our board recommendations, actually for the next slide, Mayor, thank you. So we greatly appreciate the work that the subcommittee has done. I mean, as Tamara said, this was kind of a new venture for boards. I think we were the first one to have a subcommittee formation, and we had no clue what to expect. So we were extremely pleased with the work that the council or that the subcommittee did, and bringing in the students from Regis and their evaluation and recommendations were just great. They helped kind of create a cohesive plan from what the subcommittee had discussions of. So it's, the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board has recommendations formal recommendations to move forward with all of the improvements that were offered, including we support the outreach and enforcement aspects, that more of the soft parts of this plan, as well as the construction, the hard parts of it, which was the post and cable fencing, additional fishing area, and the comprehensive sign package. This is something that the board was just excited about. They thought these improvements were well warranted, and would like to see, Amanda will be discussing kind of the nuts and bolts as it is for this a project like this. But the council was very supportive of creating kind of the most robust options. Things are going to last long and give more access for the fishing and for people to enjoy the area and maintain that visual appeal of the area, especially looking at that Eastern Shore entrance, how wonderful that looks. We would really support something that matches that level of visual appeal. So with that, I respectfully recommend all the options that that Tamara presented, and that Amanda will now continue to discuss.
All right, so you can move on to the next slide with the cost estimate. So as Andy mentioned, do want to acknowledge that there were the two recommendations that don't require a new financial commitment, the communication through the city's existing channels and additional or continued enforcement of the rules through police department, animal control, and the Parks and Recreation staff. So we, as a staff, absolutely support both of those, although they aren't called out specifically on this cost estimate slide. The costs for each of the three components were brought forward to the Parks and Rec Advisory Board prior to them making their recommendations so that they would have all of the information available to them in doing so. You'll see that there's a range for some and not for others. So the post and cable fencing had a pretty defined scope of work that we were able to identify a fairly specific cost associated with that length of fencing, around $15,000. The fishing area, depending on the engineering that goes into that and the materials, there could be a range there between $25,000 and $47,000. And then the comprehensive sign package, again, depending upon the design process, the materials selected, the quantity of signs had a range from $12,000 to $55,000. So that gives a total estimate of between $52,000 and $117,000, including a contingency of about 15%. Next slide, please. So if council were to decide to move forward with the recommendations as proposed, we would bring forward a budget package request in the summer of 2021 so that project development could take place at the end of the year. We think there's really great opportunity for an Adams County open space grant application associated with this project. Those applications are generally due in the early spring, February, March-ish, which would allow time for the project to be completed prior to year end. Next slide, please. So as I think we've mentioned earlier, staff is fully supportive of the recommendations that are brought forward to you by both the Parks and Rec Advisory Board and the subcommittee members. And tonight, we'd like to open up discussion with City Council and are seeking consensus to move forward with implementation through the 2022 budget process. With that, I'd be happy to respond. Actually, any of us, I think, would be happy to respond to any questions that council might have.
Thank you. Amanda, can I ask a clarifying question before we start? So really quickly, if I back us up to the budget request only includes the physical pieces. It does not include the additional staffing for patrol. Was that considered or no?
Correct. The recommendation was to continue with the patrol as it's occurring and increased communication through with police department, but not necessarily seeking a higher level of patrol than what they're currently seeing in that space.
Okay. Would there need to be additional budget items for communication? Like if we were to send out a mailer for some of the public engagement recommendations?
At least in the short, I mean, that's certainly an option to go further with that. But I think it was viewed that the Northglenn connection as well as social media provided a good outlet for that communication to be able to take place.
Okay. Councilmember Peterson.
Thanks very much, Mayor. Amanda, tell me what I'm missing for $55,000 for signage.
So
come with pie or something? I mean,
I will say it never ceases to amaze me, the cost of anything. And I do have Juliana Berry, who is our Parks Project Manager, on the line. If she would like to jump in, I will certainly encourage her to do so. So I'll see if she pops up on the screen here, who reached out for those cost estimates. One of the major differences was whether and in the packet, in one of the slides, talked about those footers and whether those were a small piece that was placed on the surface, a cast in place concrete footer that went further into the ground or came up a bit higher, or was a precast concrete, had a pretty significant difference in total expense, which is why we gave that range from the low end to high end.
Well,
there's a design component to that as well, to create that comprehensive signage package with consistent messaging.
Okay, well, here's my thing. Crook Reservoir is a treasure in our city, and all these recommendations are great and they're needed and they're relatively mild. I don't see anything controversial here. You're addressing a need and doing it well. But I mean, just honestly taking a look at this, related to what I believe it was Dylan saying earlier, is, and first of all, I spent a lot of time in Crook Reservoir. I grew up right across the street there. It's a very special place for me, special place for my family, and always has been. And what's special about it is because you go to Livingston Park and then all of a sudden you kind of feel like you're in the woods, right? And I can't tell you how many beautiful walks and stuff I've had, with my mom, and just talking about our lives, and you feel close to nature and everything that goes with that in such a small place. Because of that, not just the cost of that, and I understand that that's estimates and stuff, but quite frankly, for that if we want to have minimal, in your face kind of sign pollution, right? And we want people to enjoy this without being so cumbersome that every step of the way is don't have a dog, don't have a bike, don't camp, don't smoke, don't do drugs, don't whatever there, right? So first of all, I think that cost is extraordinarily concerning to me for signage alone. And especially if you're taking a look at how do we get a message across, right? Last time I was there, and it might have changed, but it was a basic Northglenn sign that says you can do this and don't do that. And I'm guessing that sign is $10, right? And so my point is, I don't want to, just because a contractor or a bidder says that this is the cost for signage, and then one, we're going to spend an inordinate amount of money that shouldn't be that much, and two, then we justify that cost by putting signs up and down the thing that takes away from the concept of somebody enjoying a park, right? And going through a maze of signage. And so I support all of these things, but I'd like to be, as we further talk about this, I'd like to see more stuff on the signs, what they're going to look like. And I'd like it to, obviously suggest a good time had by all, follow the rules, play nice with others. But let's not have an itemized laundry list of things here, and let's not spend $50,000 of the taxpayers' dollars to do it, please.
Appreciate that. And the goal is definitely not to oversign. It would be to kind of go the other way and consolidate those signs at the entry points, and then much smaller signage throughout the space as those reminders. I believe there's about 12 social trails. And again, those are like the smaller footer signs that are less obtrusive, and hopefully can give those gentle reminders to stay on trail. But again, there was a range there, and we can aim towards that lower end for sure. And as a complete project is brought forward, that would all be done through a competitive bid process. And our goal would never be to over design that in a way that we're kind of going at the high end unnecessarily.
Well, and I appreciate that. And I'm not sure, and I'd like to maybe have a further discussion on this as we come together with a final plan. And I'd like to kind of take a look at it because, again, it's not that big of an area, and there's the trail, and stay on trail. And the people that are going to go off trail, sign's probably not going to prevent them from doing that. And again, I don't want the users of this to be, faced with thou shalt not, even though it's in the public good and interest. But is it really, if it's so polluted and so intense everywhere you go? And I want people to have a good time and enjoy themselves there without being overly cumbersome on the residents and the participants. So I just like to kind of take a look at this and explore this more. Support everything about it. Support everything about this. And but if you could keep that in mind as we move forward, I would sure appreciate it.
Thank you. Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Mayor. My question has to do with the fishing area. I know you've got kind of a range of costs there, but on the side that's adjacent to Huron, as you said, as you pointed out, is developed really nicely. It looks beautiful. And so I was just wondering if the fishing area that we're putting on, to me, it looks like the south end. I'm looking at the slide with the recommended actions. But if we were to make that look more like the east side, I mean, is that at the higher end of the estimate, or the? I mean, it would be kind of nice to sort of have an idea of what we're like what's the bare bones and what's the top of the line.
So I would say neither of those options is as formal by a long shot as what you see on the east side of the reservoir. The range in cost there for these less formal fishing areas that is primarily engineering, as well as what materials are used. Is it a concrete base? Is it a flagstone base that gets people down to that water's edge and allows for an adequate fishing platform, while minimizing the erosion that's occurring. But none of the options are as formal as what you see on the east side. That was a significant, obviously, as the whole reservoir, it was improved, multi-million-dollar improvement, if I recall correctly. I'd have to look at what those exact costs are, but it was very significant.
Okay, all right, well, thank you. I was just curious about what that would look like.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Wilford.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I really just want to take a moment to give major kudos to this subcommittee. You all, I feel like you were on a little bit of a roller coaster to start, and you really found your footing, and I think have made some really impactful or potentially impactful recommendations. And I very much support everything that you all have come up with. And very much support you all continuing to operate as a subcommittee, continuing to be a voice for Croak, evaluating, upcoming issues or future things that you may want to see improved upon. And I really appreciate the way in which, the members, I think there were something like maybe 6 or 7 folks that just really stuck with it. And we're really dedicated, and we're also just really passionate because they live right there. I feel like almost everybody, their house either backs up to Croak Reservoir, they live across the street, or they're like me and they can see Croak Reservoir from their house. And I just, this to me was was an experiment, right? In terms of, can we pass this piece of work over to a subcommittee and get really good recommendations? And I think that we've absolutely seen this model, absolutely succeed. So huge thank you to all of the committee members. I know this wasn't just a let's get together and meet and talk for a couple of hours, every other month. This was a pretty significant commitment, and I just really applaud everything that you all have done. As far as recommendations, as I mentioned, I'm in full support. I trust our residents. I trust the recommendations that they've put forward. And I don't, as far as the signs issue, I think there's a pretty solid range there in terms of, how much could be spent on the low end to the high end. And, I don't feel like I need to see signs. I think that if any group should see the signs, it should be this subcommittee and the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, because you all have the experience of looking at signs and taking a look at park regulations and making recommendations that, are reasonable and thoughtful. So I don't know that that's necessarily something council needs to be weighing in on. And I guess the one question I did have for many of you, and maybe for you, Tamara, this might be best for you, is were there any discussions about the fishing pier and any improvements that you all may want to see there, or any additional, thoughts about, I know one of the pieces that was discussed towards the beginning of the subcommittee's conversations was around oxygenation in the water. and water quality. Do you want to share with us, any, I guess, maybe next steps that you may have or where you all landed on those pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. We struggled because we wanted to focus on some items that we could bring forward that were reasonable and feasible. We knew cost was going to be a very big issue. Not a very big issue, but something that we had to heavily consider. City budget is only so big, and we would like to do something sooner than later. So although we recognize that the fishing pier has some safety issues, it's rather narrow and it's got that steep riprap around all sides. It is something that we would like to address in the future, but we did not bring it forward as a priority, I think because of perceived costs and project timeline. But those conversations are still ongoing, and maybe we'll be back before you next year with another recommendation. Water quality was a very passionate conversation within our group. I have a background in water quality, and so when we were experiencing some heavy algal blooms, it was painful to see. But in talking with John Slattery from Northglenn and seeing the strategies that they implemented with the biochar, I was amazed how quickly things turned around, and just how wonderful that technology is. And so it looks like it's going to be an ongoing process, and hopefully every year we'll get better and better. And I can say the last few seasons, there's been a very noticeable decrease. And subcommittee members have also had an eye on that. So, and water quality, the issue with water quality also has to do with the low water level that we experience within Crook Reservoir. The fact that it is a stormwater retention pond kind of has our hands tied at this moment. The only flow that we get is runoff from stormwater events. And sometimes it's amazing, like it is now. And, sometimes we'll go 2 months without a rainstorm and it looks really scary. So we knew that that was something that we might not be able to overcome those issues as a subcommittee. And we were happy with the strategies that Northglenn put forth for improving water quality. So they very much took place, but in the end, we chose not to bring them forward, mainly because of those aspects.
Thank you so much for that context. It's really helpful and totally makes sense. And I did remember, I think that Amanda, you may have mentioned that there may be some Adams County open space funding or parks funding available for this. So I would say go for it. See if you are able to get any of that funding. And, I support covering whatever gap we may have. And I also, again, just want to say thank you to the subcommittee and also shout out to Parks and Rec Advisory Board. You all are fantastic as well. And I see Andy's here as well as Mary. I don't think I'm missing anybody else, but thanks for all of your work on this.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Sorry, I was just going to respond to your comment on grant opportunities. So I think there's definitely a great opportunity. There are matching dollars required. So what I would recommend, if that's the way we intend to move forward, would be that we would bring forward a budget request for kind of the lower end of the anticipated cost, so that we could then match those to do a higher level of improvement within an appropriate price range, so that we can gain usually between 50 and 70% on a passive space like this.
Sorry to interrupt you, Amanda. We just have more questions. Councilmember Escobar.
Thank you, Mayor. This was a hot topic at Atlanta Bread for several years. And I first want to say thank you to the Parks and Recreation staff and to the advisory board and to Regis University students for their dedication and time and efforts. I think it's a good first step. I support this. I won't be able to weigh in on future events, but today I definitely support this. I think it's a good investment in our community. I trust our staff to be able to come up with the right numbers for application, and I trust our county commissioners to step up and do the right thing. While Council Member Randall was talking, I was reminded of a song. It said, sign, sign, everywhere a sign. Do this, don't do that, everywhere. Can't you read the sign? I think that was the something electrical band, 5-man electrical band, something like that. But yes, I support everything that Council Member Randall Peterson said. However, I think the signs, I don't want a bunch of signs, but I do want signs that inform and instruct people of the dangers and what they can and cannot do. Because if that water quality is not safe, people should be aware of that, and they should be aware that it could be harmful to them. You are destroying the landscape. I think education is a big piece. I don't mean that you need to put a storybook on a sign, social media, the connection, others avenues, but I think educating the public as to why that sign is there and what our intent is, will go a long ways. And I'm happy to see this happen. I wish it had happened years ago, but it is happening, and I'm pleased with that. With that, I'll sign off. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Witkovich.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry about my dog. I wanted to first go ahead and echo everything that Mayor Pro Tem Wilford and Councilmember Esquivel said about the gratitude for the work the subcommittee has completed, and especially the students. It was probably a really enjoyable project, but I'm sure there was a lot of work to it, so greatly appreciate it. And as the council liaison to the Parks and Rec Board, I got to see a lot of this work going on, and everybody's really passionate about it, and I think it's all really important work. So it's greatly appreciated. I 100% accept and support the higher ranges for all three components. I know there were different options in the signage package and kind of a midpoint, perhaps maybe that's where we end up going. But I would support the high range. So, you've got the money to work with. Let's see. And I also would agree with the timeline, and also support, reaching out for grants and applying for whatever we can get. But yeah, I support all this work, and I can't wait to see it all happen. Thank you.
Councilmember Duran-Malika.
Awesome, thank you. I don't have too much to add. I feel like everything's been said. I really just wanted to come on and say thank you for everybody who's involved. I remember when this petition was going on and we had to talk about, the creation of the subcommittee. I never imagined it would turn into this. It's blossomed nicely, and I love hearing from community members who are passionate about our community. And so various aspects, whatever it is that you love, I love that you get involved, and I love that you bring your expertise and that passion to make things better for Northglenn. So I support this plan entirely. I love your recommendations. I really appreciate your work. And so yeah, thank you. That's the best I could do. But for all of your hard work, it really means a lot to see this kind of engagement. And I don't know, I love it. This is what I love about Northglenn. So thanks, guys.
Thank you. Councilmember Downing, I see that you're unmuted. Did you want to jump in?
Sure. I just want to agree with everyone. This is such a great project that we've been working on for a while. Thank you for all the committees and Regis and our Parks Board, everyone for working on this. I go back with Antonio with these very heated conversations over at Atlanta Bread about getting something done at Croak Reservoir, and we were just wringing our hands trying to figure out what to do. So it is much appreciated, all the work that everyone has done, and I fully support the recommendations. I totally hope that we can go for open space grant. That's great. And so anyway, I appreciate all the work, and I'm supportive of it. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Goff.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I asked a question first, but at the beginning, but I neglected to thank everyone for all the hard work that they did. We do appreciate it. I mean, I was just being a little like tunnel vision there. So thank you everyone for all the work. We do appreciate it. This is the best of citizen involvement with local government. So we have some wonderful recommendations that I do support, and I hope to be able to see the benefits or reap the rewards of this, to see how it all comes out, and be able to walk around the lake there well, it's not really a lake, but I always call it a lake, the Croak Reservoir, and enjoy, the improvements that you guys have envisioned. So thank you once again. I'm for it.
Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, it is a very thoughtful plan. The collaboration is just wonderful. Thank you, Amanda, for your work and for the committee, and once again for our students. And it's exciting to move forward. So I do support the high end as well, but I love it when we can try to get some grant funding to sort of ease that and cushion it a little bit. But I do believe it's important enough to put some funding behind. So thank you so much for your work. And I think I'm hoping that was all the information you needed from council tonight to move forward. Amanda, was there anything else you needed?
Nope, that is all I need. We will bring forward a budget request through the budget process this year.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Off he goes. All right, strategic plan 2021. We have an update from our city manager. I will pull up the presentation for you, and you can take it away.
Thanks, Mayor. A couple updates that I'm going to provide, just high-level overviews, and then Rupa's going to walk us through where we're at with each of the new 8 priorities from our February 2021 strategic planning session. So we're going to do that walkthrough. I've made a commitment to council going back to our February session to bring back an update on where staff bandwidth is at mid-year. So I've got that penciled in for the July 26th City Council meeting to provide an update on where staff bandwidth is. So you may have that question in the back of your mind. And then one of the next steps following tonight's presentation is to make the major update to the strategic plan document, the pretty document that lives on our website. And we'll bring that forward to City Council for approval in June. So a couple council members had given us some initial feedback that you had expressed a desire to have this council's photo included in that document, and we did go ahead and make that update several weeks ago. I forget exactly when, but I think we sent an email out that had been done. So if you look at the strategic plan on the website today, you see 2 images of council. One, the council that created the plan, and then 2, the current council. But when we go ahead and do the major update, you'll have 1 image with council and then the updated dates for the strategic plan moving forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rupa, and we'll get you updated on where we're at with these 8 strategic items. There's been exciting work being done, so ready to dive in.
Thank you, Heather, and good evening, Mayor and City Council. If we can move to the next slide, please, Mayor. Can you guys hear me or am I frozen?
We can hear you. She looks frozen.
I hear you, but she froze, yeah.
We can blame the weather. It's storming outside, right?
Sorry, I completely just dropped off. First of all, you all went frozen, which was funny enough. And then I just dropped off. I'm so sorry. So I will share my screen. And we will get ready to go. All right, is that better?
Yes, that's better. And if you want to advance one slide.
Okay.
All right, so just as a reminder, way back when in February, Council was asked to prioritize 42 items that included new ideas from Council, new ideas from staff, and then some unfunded tactical actions that were currently in our strategic plan. And at the end of the afternoon, Council reached consensus to prioritize 8 items. So this presentation will be about those 8 items. And if we can go to the next slide. So over the past few months, staff really considered these questions, and moving forward, we'll continue to consider these questions, but also ask Council to weigh in. So we want to really consider what we're actually trying to address with these priorities. What data should we use when considering decisions, what we're currently doing, and what are some additional things we can do? For those additional things, is additional funding needed? What's the staff impact? Are we going to need additional resources like more staff or new technology? What outcome does Council want ultimately? How do we measure success? And what are some next steps? So the next slide shows the 8 priorities that Council prioritized in February. And so we'll just dive right in if we want to start with the Restorative Justice Program. So for this, the judge, Chief May, our Community Resource Navigator, and our Planning Director, we met to discuss what the major issues that each of those departments, so the judge, the planning director, and the chief, what are the big issues that they're looking, that they want to identify to look to address. And so some things that were identified by the judge were code cases. And the planning director in his presentation, when we talked about neighborhood services and code enforcement levels of service, is something that was identified as well, that we see a lot of neighbor on neighbor code complaints. And then the chief identified an increase in mental health calls for service. So I'll explain this on the next slide, but we thought that these were things that could be addressed through a new crisis response team. So for the Restorative Justice Program, we'll still include it in the strategic plan, but we want to monitor it to see if this crisis response team will work to address those needs. So the crisis response team was brought forward as the police department co-response program in February. And so some things that the crisis response team will look to provide is on-scene assistance, which will include wraparound and follow-up case management services with the police department, conflict resolution services, which is something that neighborhood services and the municipal court could both utilize, and also to start a juvenile justice program through the courts as well. So both those things, and then also incorporating the existing community resource navigator position for people experiencing homelessness. That position, the current position, will be wrapped into this crisis response team. Our next steps is to provide a high-level overview of the program to both the Diversity, Inclusivity, and Social Equity Board, as well as the Community Co-Production Policing Advisory Board in June. So we want to hear their feedback and tweak any recommendations that we need to make before we come to Council on August 2nd. And so this item will be brought back to Council on August 2nd for a full discussion. The Boys and Girls Club. So this was something that the Parks and Rec director was already in conversation with the City of Thornton. The City of Thornton purchased a building for the purpose of providing youth and teen programming. The discussions with Boys and Girls Club fell through because there was an agreement on the financial side of things, but Thornton will continue to look for potential partnership opportunities and will include our city in those opportunities. So for this one, we'll monitor this item and bring forth to council any opportunities that may come about with this partnership with Thornton. The next item is Village Greens fencing. So the next steps for this, and just as a reminder, this request was to install new fencing between the skate park at EB Rains Park, and the adjacent residential properties in the Village Greens neighborhood. So we need consensus from homeowners. And if we do get that consensus, we'll ask for that budget request for the fiscal year 2022 budget. And the reason why we're going to include it with the 2022 budget is because it's going to be a 6 to 12 month process anyway. So by the time we actually go to bid on the project, it'll be the next fiscal year. So we'll bring more details on that once we do reach that consensus from homeowners. The next item is Webster Lake safety concerns. So right now, staff is working to compile data for council to review on July 2nd, so that council can really have a robust conversation on identifying what the core issues are at Webster Lake and what the desired outcomes are. And we as staff can walk council through what we currently are doing, some recommendations that we have, but really trying to get to the core of what council is hoping to gain from this priority. So more to come on July 12th. The next item is pedestrian and roadway safety. So this was brought up as a request to implement more aggressive traffic calming measures and enforcement to decrease speeding on main roads. So after hearing the council discussion and getting some additional feedback, the city manager is renaming this priority to pedestrian and roadway safety. So this item is scheduled to come back before council on June 21st, and staff will provide a comprehensive review of what we're currently doing in terms of enforcement and traffic calming. And then if there's a desire from council for staff to do more, there is a potential for additional funding to be requested through the 2022 budget. So stay tuned for that one. All right, the N-Line Fair Equity Regional Initiative. So this one, RTD is going to be conducting a comprehensive system-wide study on its fares from a regional perspective. So that's going to start this summer, and it's estimated to take about 18 months. So during this time, we'll continue to monitor it, keep council and the community apprised of any opportunities to participate. And once there are any solid recommendations, we'll certainly bring it back to council. But for now, we'll monitor it and inform how the public and how you all can get involved in the opportunities that hopefully will be coming out this summer in the next 18 months. And I think we're at our last priority. So the adventure course targeting ages 12 and up. So our recommendation for this is to include it in the 2022 Parks Master Plan update. So the Parks Master Plan update, that's required by the state every 5 years. So our next one is coming up next year. And so what you're gonna see in the 2022 budget recommendation is to hire a consultant. And this will really allow for more robust community engagement opportunities for the community and also for council to prioritize this item, the adventure course, along with the other large park redevelopment projects, so that way the community and council will be able to prioritize as we do this master plan update. So that is our recommendation for this one. And to summarize, since I think I ran through that kind of fast, but just to give you guys an idea of what to expect with these 8 priorities. So June, July, and August, you'll hear a more comprehensive, detailed look at the pedestrian and roadway safety, the Webster Lake safety concerns, and the crisis response team. You'll get a comprehensive look at those 3 items. And then in the 2022 budget recommendation, If council wants to move forward with a crisis response team, you'll see that item with the 2022 budget request. If there's homeowner consensus achieved for the Village Greens fencing, that will also be included in the budget request. For the adventure course, so again, that item itself, you're not going to see a budget request for us to construct an adventure course in 2022, but we do want to include that item in the parks master plan update to give opportunity to the community to weigh in. And then the 3 items that we'll monitor and continue to provide council with feedback on: the restorative justice program. So we want to see if the crisis response team, if that gets approved, if that really addresses the needs that the restorative justice program was intended to do. And we'll keep council apprised of the N-Line initiative as well as the Boys and Girls Club. And lastly, I just want to end by saying these 8 will be incorporated into the 5-year strategic plan that council will get an updated version of that in June. So with that, I will take a breath and open it up for any questions.
Councilmember Goff.
Thank you. Thank you, Rupa. This is very clear and organized, so it's making it easy for me to understand. And I have a couple of questions. I'm just wondering, I know the Community Resource Navigator is a part-time job, and I know there were some reasons why that was the case. Where in the plan is that position going to be full-time, or is that not part of this discussion?
Yeah, so it's not part of, well, you'll hear more details as to why we're not recommending that to move to a full-time position. If we didn't have the other parts of the crisis response team, so I'll give you a sneak preview. So with the crisis response team, we want to provide a more robust case management system and a process to follow up with clients. So we're going to ask for additional staff, but we're going to keep the Community Resource Navigator as a part-time position. We think that should be sufficient.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll look forward to hearing more about that. Then the other question I had is, I know the concern about Webster Lake was brought up, and I go there a lot, and I've never seen, many of the things that I've heard about happening there. So it'll be very interesting for me to see what kind of data the staff is collected. And I just wanted to point out for anybody who's listening that data collection piece is time consuming and is something that shouldn't be brushed off, or people complain about why is it not happening sooner. That's a major undertaking. So I appreciate the fact that you guys are doing that, and I also appreciate the questions about like what is our like how are we going to assess what we do, the clearly defined outcomes and things like that, because sometimes that is a little tricky when if I or any person has one bad experience, it just kind of colors your perspective, and you think that it's always happening like that, and it might not be always happening. But if it is happening, then we do need to take care of it. So I appreciate that, and I just want to say thank you.
Councilmember Goff, I agree with you, especially when that one person reaches out to multiple council members. So I have a related question that's not totally connected, but it's about Webster Lake. So I guess I'm just wondering if there's a specific plan in place to get it cleaned up, because I was over there and there is so much trash in the water and trash all over the sidewalks. And it was surprising. It was prom weekend, so there were guests and there were a lot of comments made that then they apologized for, thinking they offended me, but that wasn't it. It's just, it was visibly dirty, and I hadn't seen it in that state. So I just wasn't sure if our Parks Department needed to hire some more staff. I know we had cut back during COVID. So just kind of wanted a status update on that.
I'll provide a couple thoughts and then have Amanda jump on and talk about more specifics. So more of a forward-looking piece to this is the update to our Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which just to make a minor correction is required by our city code not by state. State requirement is tied to the comprehensive planning process. One of the pieces that Amanda and I have talked about that is really important in relationship to parks, the mayor mentioned the visible impact, and we have had decreased staff. We're not quite there with our seasonals yet for this summer, is really looking at what is the desired level of service at each of our parks. So whether that be aesthetics or, a variety of things, what do our residents want to see? And then how do we align resources? So current staff, do we need more staff to be out there? We've heard complaints specifically about Webster Park with trash, with dog waste, with, waste from the geese. So in order to address those, we need staff available to, go out and pick up trash, pick up dog waste. Amanda can touch on the additional steps we're going to take with education of dog owners, something near and dear to my heart because I experience it firsthand when I walk my little one at my neighborhood park. So there's some work we can do in terms of communication and marketing for dog owners. But ultimately, if we want to provide a higher level of service, and so what do you experience when you go to Webster E.B. Raines Park, what you walk around Webster Lake, or whatever park it is, that desired level of service, I think, is really a conversation we need to have through the master planning process, which is why we want to hire a third-party consultant to walk us through. Previously, we did that process in-house, and I think it's time to do it outsourced. So we have additional data and an outside set of eyes into our overall system and can really generate some good engagement with our public as to, what those desired level of services look like for our park system. So I'll stop there. And Amanda, do you want to jump in with several of the things that we've talked about, the dog owner education, and then some of the other pieces, please?
Of course. Let me start on the staffing side. We are definitely struggling with finding seasonals this year, and our neighboring cities are experiencing something very similar. It's been a pretty regular topic of conversation over the last couple of weeks with the Adams County Parks and Recreation directors. We were very hopeful that our increased minimum wage that really impacts our frontline positions pretty dramatically was going to make a big difference. And it seemed to right at the beginning of the season. And it absolutely helped for some positions. We saw our day camp positions fill very quickly this year. We saw our cashier and pedal boat attendant positions fill very quickly this year. We're doing okay on lifeguards, but those parks positions are tough. And it's a tough job, and it's hot and it's hard work, and we know that. So we have 4 on board currently out of 13, and are trying to, there's a couple more that are kind of in process that they did interviews with. There were several interviews done for park rangers last week, and that staff are hoping they're going to be able to move 2 candidates forward for that process. So I was having a conversation with Doug earlier today just about they're feeling the pressure as spring turns into summer, and they're trying to stay caught up. So they can definitely put some additional attention at E.B. Raines and address at least the short-term concerns. But I know that they're scrambling to get everything done this season, but it's not due to a lack of approved positions. It's being able to fill those seasonal roles. And then on the dog side, one of the strategies that we've talked about, we have dog bag dispensers in our parks. We have rules about keeping your dog on a leash. We have rules about picking up after your dog. And whether there's a sign saying that or common courtesy, right? That should be a pretty well-known expectation of a dog owner. Sometimes people just assume they don't have to, that there's someone there that will take care of it for them, or it's easier not to. So we are going to try a new strategy this year, and we have ordered, in the past, we've ordered the little individual dog bag dispensers, and they've been given away at events or through our stormwater department in Public Works as a means of educating the public about what dog waste does to stormwater. We're going to try that a little differently this year, and each of the park staff is going to carry a supply with them so that they can have those conversations a little more one-on-one as time allows. But when they see somebody in the park with a dog, and even whether they need to say something or it's an opportunity to say hi and hand out a dog bag dispenser so people can clip it right to their leash and have it with them all the time. And we're hoping that maybe that little bit of social pressure of somebody directly asked me to do it might have an impact. So combined with all of the other strategies that are already in place of permanent dog bag dispensers and being a part of our park rules and education opportunities in connection or social media, we're hoping that little maybe personal touch has an impact. Did I catch everything? I can't remember if there's one more item in there or not.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. Councilmember Duran Malika.
Yeah, I actually just have a follow-up question about just, so thank you for giving the update about all of the 8 things that were identified. There's a couple obviously that are going forward, right? So the Boys and Girls Club, that's just, gonna follow flat. And so the N-Line Equity Fair, because there's actually nothing we can do about that. So does that give us the opportunity to maybe appoint things to go in their places? Because looking back at the list that's in the packet, I mean, there's a lot of great ideas still on here. Is there an opportunity for that to happen and move forward? How would that work? And how can we, engage that as a council? Just curious if that's an option.
I think sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, just go ahead, Heather.
You take this one, Heather. So that's the intent with bringing back the staff bandwidth discussion to council in late July, because I made that commitment that as we come out of COVID and as we get other work done, the bandwidth should open up, and I think we'll see that. So we'll bring that discussion forward, and if it's council's desire to say, okay, these, as you gave those examples, Councilmember Duran Malika, can we put a couple in its place? We can have that discussion, but we'll need to go through that process with council, and so. Be thinking about that. I would say in advance of the July 26th discussion. And as I'm having conversations with staff, I'll work to tee that up and anything we can do in advance of that session so you all can be thinking about what you might be interested in, advancing or putting in the place of other based on available staff capacity. We can figure that out.
Okay, awesome. Great, thanks.
Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just one additional thing. So for the Boys and Girls Club, yes, that item might be at a standstill, but when it goes into the strategic plan, we don't have to put something specific as we want a partnership with the Boys and Girls Club. We can say that we want to increase, opportunities for youth and teen programs in our area. So that way it's a little more broad, so we're not just boxing ourselves into the Boys and Girls Club.
Okay, that makes sense. Great, thanks.
Any other questions for Heather or Rupa tonight? Comments? Nope. Okay.
And we'll start thinking about the 2022 strategic planning process probably late summer, early fall.
Sounds good.
So be thinking about that as well.
Sounds good. If we cross our fingers, we won't do it in a little square of squares.
Right.
We'll be able to do it in person.
I welcome the in-person retreat setting.
All right. Are there any other items for council tonight? No. All right. Well, have a great night. We wish you well, Jenny. Good luck.